8 billion minds hum beneath glowing screens. Cities claw the sky. Rockets pierce the silence above Earth. The web connects souls across hemispheres and time zones. A species that bends metal into flight and probes the edge of known space strides confidently through the 21st century. But zoom back. Not 1,000 years, not even 10,000. Go back 2 million. A population of less than 10,000, scattered and starving, no clothing, no tools, and, most mysteriously, no fur. In a world of predators and ice, our ancestors made a change that defied logic. In the brutal arms race of survival, they stripped away their only natural armor, and they nearly vanished. The question is, why? What broke their skin? What saved their bloodline? And what did the wind whisper as naked bodies first walked into the cold unknown? If you're using these to fall asleep, that's literally why I make them. So, subscribe maybe, and tell me where you are and what time. I check comments, and it's always Cape Town at breakfast, Tokyo at bedtime, Bogota somewhere in between. All at once, the same story reaching everywhere. The Earth 2 million years ago was not the home we know now. It was a world ruled by heat and cold in cruel succession, where savannas stretched endlessly under a blistering sun by day, then froze in silence by night. The continents groaned with tectonic unrest. Megafauna roamed in packs, predators with teeth like sabers and eyes that glowed in the moonlight, and clinging to survival in tiny familial bands was a species barely distinguishable from its animal kin, Homo erectus. Upright, yes, but vulnerable. No claws, no spears. And now, no fur. Something had happened, something irreversible, a loss that should have been fatal, yet sparked a chain reaction that would lead, impossibly, to everything we now call human. They hadn't always been that way. If we played time in reverse, peeling back the years like layers of old skin, we'd find a different creature. A human ancestor cloaked in dense body hair, built for wooded shadows, not open plains. Fur once protected them from ultraviolet rays, kept parasites at bay, insulated bodies during cold snaps and stormy seasons. Evolution had crafted hair as armor, not fashion. But then, a shift, a fracture in the balance. Forests shrank, pushed back by warming climates and erratic monsoons. Trees that once provided shelter gave way to grasslands, and with them came a new demand: endurance. The prey changed, so did the hunters. And somewhere under that relentless sun, thick fur turned from asset to liability. It held too much heat. And heat, in this dawning world, killed more often than teeth or claws ever could. It began not with intelligence, nor with fire, but with sweat. Under the punishing equatorial sun, survival was no longer a contest of brute strength, but of endurance. Persistence hunting, the strategy of chasing prey not for minutes but for hours, demanded bodies that could cool efficiently. And here, bare skin gave a brutal advantage. No other predator hunted this way. Cheetahs pounced, lions ambushed. But these relentless bipeds chased until the antelope collapsed from exhaustion. Their secret? Not speed, not weapons, but sweat glands, pumping fluid through hairless skin, releasing heat in a silent war against overheating. This was the gamble. Shedding fur meant losing protection, but it bought time. And in that time, in the space between predator and prey, an ape in transformation found its first victory, one drip of sweat at a time. But victory came at a cost. A hairless body meant more than just efficient cooling. It meant exposure. Nightfall brought not relief, but dread. With temperatures dropping sharply after sunset, the same skin that lent an edge under the sun became a liability in the dark. Frostbite whispered across limbs. Infants died in the cold. Predators scented warm blood too easily. And with no fur to muffle their heat, These early humans became beacons in the dark, glowing targets for the hungry. Mothers wrapped their young in leaves and dried grass. Bones reveal strange fractures, suggesting early cradles or bindings. Fires, when they came, flickered weakly and died without warning. In this fragile state, Homo erectus stood between extinction and adaptation, abandoned by the very trait that birthed its strength. How did they survive? The clues remain locked in bones, in ash, in shadows left by the ones who walked before us, shivering but unbroken. But not all the clues lie in skeletons and soot. Some are etched into our very biology. Look closer at human skin and find answers whispered by evolution's long memory. The density of sweat glands, more than 5 million across the body, surpasses nearly every other animal. The near total absence of fur aligns us with creatures of entirely different lineages, like elephants and whale species, that evolved to shed heat or slip through fluid environments. Even skin pigmentation tells a tale. As melanocytes darkened the skin to shield DNA from solar radiation, they marked a turning point. Those who survived under open skies carried the code for resilience, passed through bloodlines like sacred fire. And when mothers began to give birth to babies more helpless than ever before, prematurely, because of changing pelvis sizes and upright walking, touch became survival. Skin to skin, warmth transferred, bonds strengthened. The loss of fur wasn't just physical, it reshaped our social world, bringing bodies together by necessity and changing the way we felt, nurtured, and belonged. Naked, exposed, and fragile, the human story bent toward connection long before it reached civilization. And yet, evolution does not deal in kindness. For every gain, there is a cost. As early humans moved farther from forest shelter, the sun punished them harder. Parasites adapted. Skin broke down under ultraviolet siege. Their nakedness, once a gift of endurance, became an invitation disease, dehydration, infection. The price of survival grew steeper with every step into the open. But something else began to change as well. Patterns emerged. Hair remained in select areas not by accident, but by design. The scalp, the groin, the eyelashes, the brows. Each retained patch told a deeper story: thermoregulation, pheromone signaling, protection from sweat or Sunday. This was not random loss. This was sculpted adaptation, chiseled by trial. And through it all, they endured. Not because fur kept them warm, but because together they found new ways to shelter each other. And then, just as the gamble of bare skin seemed too heavy to bear, something remarkable echoed through the ages. Fire, first captured, then kindled. It gave form to the night and warmth to the skin it once threatened. With fire came light, defense, and the ability to extend day into dark. The naked ape, once shivering and hunted, now gathered around embers that danced like ancient spirits. Hairlessness no longer meant helplessness. Fire filled the role fur once played, offering both protection and power. It brought cooking, which softened food and shrank guts, unlocking energy for brain growth. It made campfires the first hearths, circles of shared story and heat. And in its glow, humanity redefined survival, not as something endured alone, but as something shaped by community. The loss that almost ended them had set in motion the tools that would carry them forward. In ashes and sweat, under sun and stars, humans had become something both more and less than animal. And that transformation, born in agony and brilliance, still burns in every generation that seeks warmth in the dark. But before fire, before symbols and songs, there was something else that flickered to life. A rhythm buried deeper than warmth, older than flame. It beat inside muscle and memory, a tremor called cooperation. Stripped of fur, the body made demands that no one could meet alone. Infants needed constant warmth. The sick needed watching. The wounded had to be fed. So they stayed, not just out of necessity, but out of something new: mutual care. Division of roles. Emotional bonds arising like unseen roots between individuals. And slowly, around every vulnerability, a structure formed. Not walls or roofs, not at first, but ritual, behavior, rhythm, the earliest bones of culture. That nakedness didn't end the story. It rewrote its terms. What began as a weakness created the conditions for empathy, for language, for civilization. And in that fragile space between skin and fire, humans became human. Today, we cover our bodies with fabric spun from machines, write messages across oceans in milliseconds, and harness electrons like firelight. But the shadow of that ancient gamble follows us still. Every bead of sweat on a runner's forehead, every lullaby sung in the night, every instinct to shield the young and gather close when danger nears, these are echoes. Echoes of a time when the choice to shed fur was not just about thermodynamics, but about transformation. A physical act that cracked open the door to consciousness, vulnerability, and connection. The cold nearly killed us, but in that mortally exposed state, we discovered what no claw or coat ever could: that to be naked together is a kind of strength. And in the end, it wasn't fur that made us survive, but the warmth that passed between us when all else was stripped away. So when we look into the mirror skin bare, stories buried, what we see is not weakness but inheritance. A body that carries the signature of deserts crossed, of shelters built not from stone but from each other. That smooth skin is not a flaw, it is a memory. It recalls the heat of the savannah, the chase, the cold night pressed between bodies. It reflects every ancestor who shivered and stayed, who bled and bandaged, who lived long enough to teach love through touch. To lose fur was never just a shedding, it was a shaping. A risk that forced invention, a cost that bought cooperation. And in that trade, written not in ink but in sweat and ash and skin, we became something the world had never seen before. We became human. But not all were destined to follow this path. Across the vast stretches of ancient earth, pockets of hominin species diverged. Some clung tightly to their coats of hair, adapting instead to cooler climes or denser canopy. Others vanished entirely, their evolutionary gambit silenced in bone and sediment. The naked ape, for all its fragility, walked a knife's edge of fate. Climate shifts would return with punishing cycles, ice blanketing once fertile plains, droughts turning green into dust. And still, they limped forward not by certainty, but by improvisation. It was not mastery of nature that saved them, but responsiveness. To risk everything by losing fur was not a declaration of strength, it was an acknowledgement of change. And those who changed fastest, who endured being broken and reassembled by the elements, built a legacy etched not in stone tablets or cave paintings, but in skin. Soft, scarred, sun-warmed skin, a living parchment on which stories of survival were written, chapter after fragile chapter. The next chapters, still unfolding, begin the same as they always have, with vulnerability, the original gateway to our greatest strength. And this enduring vulnerability may be the very reason we're still here, because in shedding fur, we became creatures of exposure, not just to the elements, but to each other. We could see pain in another's eyes, feel warmth through a shared touch, read intention in a twitch of shoulder or shift of breath. Communication deepened long before words were carved from sound. Eye contact became connection. Gesture became promise. The loss of fur did not just make us survive, it taught us how to reach, outward, inward, across space and time. It raised new questions we still ask, within every act of collaboration, every sacrificial love, every instinct to protect rather than dominate. How much are we willing to risk to adapt? What are we prepared to lose in order to remain alive. Maybe this is the final lesson of our bare skin, that true power lives not in armor, but in openness, and that from the shivering edge of extinction, humanity was not born perfect, but perfectly unfinished. Waiting, still evolving, still writing the story, one layer at a time. So the next time a chill runs over skin left bare by wind or water, remember, it is not vulnerability alone that defines us, but what we do with it. The cold that once threatened to silence our lineage instead became the forge of innovation, empathy, and resilience. Our naked bodies still tell the tale, written in tactile memory and evolutionary rhythms. We touch, not just to feel, but to affirm existence. We gather, not just for warmth, but because our very survival depends on connection. And in the quiet hours, when light fades from glass towers or firelight flickers in some distant camp, we are still that same fragile species, scarred, inventive, reaching, not despite the loss of fur, but because of it. What began as a mutation became a message. In exposure, humanity finds its shape. And in every breath drawn across bare skin, the ancient story continues. And that ancient story, now carried in the quiet movements of modern life, pulses beneath every layer we add to hide what was once exposed. Our coats and homes and digital shelters may shield us from cold or contact, but beneath them, the blueprint remains unchanged. We are still designed to connect through warmth, to read each other's silences as much as speech, to protect not just ourselves but each other. The legacy of our lost fur is not absence, it is presence. Presence in each embrace, each shoulder lent, each fire kindled in the name of belonging. It is the echo of choices made not out of dominance, but out of delicate necessity. And if survival was once a matter of enduring the night unclothed, now it is carried forward in the skin-to-skin transfers of kindness, in every act that says, I see you, I feel you, I will not leave you in the cold. That is how the naked ape became the storytelling, city-building, sky-chasing wonder it is today. It began with a shedding, and became, somehow, everything. In the grand arc of our species, marked not by conquest, but by adaptation, it's the subtlest moments that shaped the deepest truths. The choice to lose fur was not truly a choice, but a convergence of pressures, of climate and terrain and biology, whispering into the marrow of an emerging species. And in answering that whisper with evolution, we unlocked new possibilities. Not weapons, not armor, but awareness. Cold air brushing exposed skin became communication. Shared heat became trust. Weakness became revolution. We didn't survive because we were stronger. We survived because we learned again and again to live exposed. And as long as we do, as long as we honor fragility not as flaw but as origin, then the story that began with a shiver will never end. The fire still burns, the skin still breathes, and the naked ape, for all its scars, still walks forward together, unfinished and unafraid. Look closely at humanity now, and it becomes clear we are no longer defined by what we lost, but by what we gained in its absence. The fur is gone, yes, but what replaced it is far more intricate. Language that paints pictures in the mind, eyes that read emotion in microseconds, hands that build bridges, wrap wounds, cradle life. We wear clothes, but also stories. We use blankets, but also touch. And in every layer we place upon ourselves lies a remembrance of what came before, of the countless fires lit in fear and hope, of the cold nights that demanded more than instinct. They demanded imagination, understanding, togetherness. Our smooth skin became a canvas, a symbol of evolution's greatest paradox, that the most vulnerable species might also become the most enduring, not by hiding from the world, but by stepping into it fully, exposed and awake. And that is why fur did not disappear in error. It vanished so something else could emerge, a creature not simply surviving the world, but shaping it with every fragile, fearless step. The silence of that sacrifice still lingers in us. In every scar healed over time, in every hand reaching without armor, the echo resounds. Stripping fur was never just an adaptation. It was an offering, traded for a future not yet imagined. We offered our warmth to the winds, and in return, gained the fire of consciousness. We stood at the mercy of the world, and learned to construct meaning from pain. And even now, centuries and civilizations away from that primal bargain, we revisit its terms. When we care, when we comfort, when we choose to expose rather than conceal, the story of our skin is not over. It moves through every open gesture, every fragile truth confessed, every connection that bridges what isolation broke. It promises that even in a world remade by metal and wire, the soft, unguarded body still matters. That what saved us continues to save us, not the loss, but what we built in its wake. This is the story the wind once whispered over naked bodies trembling in the dark. That to be human is not to be protected, but to be felt. And that feeling, ultimately, is what makes us endure. So now, in the fluorescent hush of subway trains, in the hush between heartbeat and breath, that ancient decision echoes on. A choice carved not just in gene sequences but in gestures, in warmth passed hand to hand, in the quiet courage of vulnerability. Humanity's strength was never forged in fur or fangs, or force. It was woven in the delicate fabric of togetherness. Against every evolutionary odd, we exposed ourselves to the world and to one another. That nakedness became the ground where intimacy grew, where language found its first beat, where civilization would someday rise. And even now, in a world wrapped in synthetic skins and surrounded by walls, it waits under each layer, each touch, each moment of shared silence. A reminder that our origin story isn't one of dominance, but of resilience come by sacrifice. That when we lost our fur, we didn't lose a shield, we found a mirror. And in it, we saw each other more clearly than ever before. Through every age, under furred threats and icy moons, the truth persisted like embers hidden in ash. Transformation demands sacrifice, and in losing their fur, our ancestors laid bare not just their skin, but their future. What began as a vulnerability became the architecture of memory, sensation, and meaning. Today, we write symphonies with voices once used for warning cries, draw blueprints by hands once curled against winter winds. Our tools, our cities, our digital ghosts, none of these could exist without that primal exposure. We are the descendants of risk-takers, not conquerors. Survival walked beside surrender, and together, they shaped something enduring. The loss of fur was never the end of the animal, but the beginning of the human. So even now, wrapped in artificial warmth, surrounded by glass and light, we carry that origin in every breath, still soft, still strong, still walking forward scarred, connected, unfinished. And maybe, in the frenetic rhythm of modern life, that old vulnerability is exactly what we need to remember, not as a weakness, but as a tether to the thread that wove our survival. The same thread that taught us to rely on each other, to make music from hardship, to shape futures from fire and flesh. So as skyscrapers rise and satellites look down on a world we once crossed barefooted and bare-skinned, the tale written in our bodies endures. It says we are not alone. That warmth once shared in the cold still burns through compassion. That every skin, though wrapped in fabric or armor or fear, invites connection. 2 million years ago, we shed our fur and nearly died. But in doing so, we found something fur could never give a reason not just to live, but to belong. And that is the legacy. pressing gently against your pulse this very moment. The naked truth of being human, always adapting, always reaching, always unfinished. 2 million years later, that legacy still breathes against our skin. In hospitals where newborns are placed on bare chests, in homes where arms wrap around shivering shoulders, in the touch that stops a trembling hand from shaking our nakedness, continues to matter. It is the source code of intimacy, the design that favored collaboration over armor, empathy over insulation. Every warmth we give or receive completes an ancient circuit. From savanna to skyline, from ash to ember to electric light, our story has always been about finding meaning in the absence of protection. And so we go on, not by growing back fur, but by growing forward, layered not in hair, but in memory, connection, and care. The world still tests us. The cold still comes. But now, when it does, we remember the answer that once saved us, not to cover up, but to come closer. And in that closeness, in that story written on skin and finished only in presence, we find the oldest truth of all, that being human was never about surviving alone. It was about shivering together and choosing to stay. Perhaps the most haunting truth is this: despite all our progress, despite walls and wires and fabric and fire, we are still shaped by that first shedding. Beneath every technological marvel lies a shared fragility, older than stone, older than speech. Skin still flinches from cold. Hearts still reach for warmth. And in our loneliest moments, we search not for power, but for presence. The story of why humans lost their fur is not one of biology alone, but of identity. It is the clearest map of who we are, and why we endure a story, etched not just in fossils, but in every comforting touch and every quiet act of care. We walk upright, yes, but more importantly, we walk toward each other, naked, together, unfinished. And perhaps, in the end, that's the greatest survival trait of all. So the next time you see your own reflection, smooth skin brushed with sunlight or shadow, remember that you are looking at triumph, not loss. That the absence of fur is not a gap in design, but an invitation to connection, to belonging. You wear the inheritance of resilience, paid for in risk, and remade in every embrace, every shiver shared, every quiet vow not to let one another face the cold alone. The story of why humans lost their fur is not locked in the past. It lives here, breathing in hospitals and bedrooms and bustling streets, wherever warmth finds its way from one body to another. It is not gone. It has only changed form, from hair to hands, from coat to care. The wind may still whisper across bare skin, but now it carries not just threat, but memory. And as long as we listen, really listen, we will hear it say this: you survived, not by covering up, but by opening up. And in that opening, you became something more than animal. You became human, and you are still becoming. And in becoming human, we did not close the book. We wrote a prologue, a signal across epochs that our most powerful tool is not what we wield, but what we feel. We built machines to soar and homes to shade, mapped genomes and galaxies, yet all of it circles back to that first vulnerable truth, skin against skin in an unlit world. We grew not because we shed fur, but because we kept shedding everything that held us apart: fear, isolation, silence. Still, the question echoes: what will we choose to shed next? As our species faces new chills, climate, disconnection, the digital cold, we carry within us the wisdom of that first exposure. We have always survived by moving closer. And so, in every act of care, in every barrier broken by empathy, we honor the original adaptation. Not fur, but fire. Not protection, but presence. And the story goes on not in pages, but in pulses, across time, across skin, across us. And maybe that's the final mystery. That 2 million years ago, naked under an uncaring sky, we surrendered the one thing every other creature clung to, and nearly perished for it. But in that surrender, we stumbled into something no other species discovered. The cold forged our need, and in that need, we found each other. The shedding of fur was not the closing of one chapter, but the quiet spark that began the human saga. A story of bodies made for touch, of minds opened by struggle, of spirits hardened not by isolation, but by unity. So now, every clasped hand in fear, every child pulled close in the storm, every moment someone opens their heart and sits unguarded with another that is the fur we never grew back, that is the warmth that saved us. The bare-skinned truth of what it means to be human, exposed, enduring, and always reaching toward the light. So as this story meets its final thread, sewn through time from jungle canopy to concrete skyline, remember that it was never just a question of why the fur vanished. It was what filled the space it left behind. In that absence, humanity bloomed a species defined not by what it wore, but what it shared. Love not as sentiment, but as strategy. Warmth not as luxury, but as necessity. The loss that nearly ended us became our genesis. And even now, caught between the speed of satellites and the silence of skin, we carry it forward. Every shared gaze, every hand held in silence, every moment we choose empathy over indifference is a continuation of that first gamble. Beneath it all, the cold has never really left. But neither has the fire. And as long as we pass that fire on through touch, through presence, through story, then 2 million years after we stood trembling and bare, we are still surviving. We are still becoming. And we are never truly alone. Each of us, now motioning through a world thick with invention and noise, carries a quiet echo of that first decision. It hums beneath the pulse. It whispers between fingertips. The wind that once threatened is still with us, but so is the ancient answer. We survive by feeling, by reaching, by holding against the cold, no matter what form the cold takes. That's the truth buried beneath skyscrapers and screens, waiting in the space between a stranger's smile and a lover's hand. We are not separate from that naked ancestor, the one who stood in the dark with nothing but breath and will and each other. We are the continuation. The heat that still transfers, the story still told. And as long as there is skin to feel and fire to share, that story never ends. It only finds new ways to begin. So let this be the message traced in the outlines of every scar, carved into the memory of every touch. The fur was never just about warmth. It was a question, and the answer humanity gave was courageous, painful, and profoundly beautiful. In losing what once protected us, we found the power not to dominate the earth, but to belong to it and to each other. That ancient decision still lives beneath our clothes, our customs, our conversations. It lives in the way we lean closer when someone shivers, in the instinct to reach out when silence grows too wide. This is the legacy of the naked ape, not invention, but intimacy, not power, but presence. A fire passed hand to hand through 2 million years of cold, still burning, still rising, still enough to warm the world. That is not just survival. That is the definition of being human. So when the last light fades from today's skyline, and the wind brushes past skin once again unfurred, remembered to know that you are shaped by a decision older than flame. You are wrapped not in hair, but in a lineage of risk and resilience, of bodies that chose to step forward exposed. The warmth you give, the tenderness you feel, the instinct to gather in the storm, all of it is evolution's quiet answer to the cold that almost swallowed us. 2 million years ago, we shed our fur. But what we gained was everything that makes us more than survival machines. Compassion, cooperation, care. In every touch, every moment we reach instead of retreat, we continue the fire's journey. So carry it on, gently, boldly. Because even now, in a world of steel and signal, the most human thing we can do is still the simplest: to be there, skin to skin, when someone reaches through the dark. And perhaps that's how we'll meet the next great threshold, not in bursts of innovation or conquest, but in quiet acts of continuity. Not by recapturing the fur we lost, but by deepening the warmth we've learned to share. Through pandemics and polarizations, through melting ice and rising noise, the human answer remains unchanged. We adapt by remaining open. We persist by being present. Skin still stretches across time as a universal invitation not to turn away, but to turn toward. And for every child born into this ever-accelerating world, bare-chested against a parent's heartbeat, the story begins again. Not with fear, but with connection. A legacy wrapped not in fur, but in fire and feeling. As long as we remember that, long as we reach, when it matters most, the species that once stood trembling at the edge of extinction will never vanish. The light is still passed. The warmth is still given. And the human story, fragile and fearless as ever, carries on. Because in the end, what endures is not the absence of fur, but the presence of something infinitely more powerful. Us, flesh and bone, yes, but also memory and will. The same hands that once huddled around a dying flame now grasp the tools to reshape planets. The same skin that once trembled in the chill now carries CRISPR, satellites, symphonies. We did not rise in spite of fragility, we rose because of it. Because every time the cold crept in, we drew closer, not apart. Every time we could have chosen armor, we chose each other. 2 million years ago, a species peeled back its shield and exposed its core. And in that naked truth, the greatest blueprint for survival was written not in fur, but in fire, in touch, in story. And if we remember that, through every storm waiting ahead, we will not just survive. We will endure, together, as we always have. So now, wherever we are wrapped in blankets or steel, beneath neon or starlight, we remain living testaments to a decision that rewrote the destiny of a species. The fur never grew back, and it never needed to. What replaced it was fiercer, softer, more enduring than any natural armor in each other. We survive not because we are hardened, but because we are held. From ancient embers to digital lifelines, the warmth we offer is the thread that binds continents, cultures, centuries. So whether it's sunset in Nairobi or sunrise in New York, remember this: someone else is listening, someone is reaching, someone is still warming their hands by the same invisible fire that first gathered our ancestors in the dark. And as long as that fire passes from heartbeat to heartbeat, touch to touch, we are not just remembering history, we are completing it, together, always becoming, always human. So when all the skyscrapers crumble and the satellites fall silent, even then, the truth stitched into our bare skin will remain. It was never the fur that made us strong. It was the courage to stand without it, to brave the elements armed only with each other. That legacy, carved into the warmth we give and the empathy we carry, is humanity's compass, pointing not to dominance or perfection, but to connection, to care. We are the children of fire and feeling, of risk and reach. And though millennia may pass and the world reshapes, one thing endures. We survived the cold because we chose to be warm for one another. That's the story we hold, not in books or buildings, but in our blood. A story still alive, still glowing, Every time one soul leans into another and says without words, "I will keep you warm. I will keep you human." And this is how we never disappear. And so, long after the last fire fades and the final shelter crumbles, the memory of our naked beginning will still live on, not in relics or ruins, but in the way we face the unknown. Every time we stand trembling before a new horizon, unarmed but not alone, we reenact that ancient defiance. Every kindness extended, every warmth shared despite the chill, becomes a continuation of that first, fatal risk to survive, not through strength, but through closeness. To lose the fur was to lose the illusion of separation. And in the sacred space it left behind, we didn't just find survival, we found each other. That, in the end, is why we are still here. Not because we covered what was exposed, but because we chose, time and again, to stay exposed, together. And that, burning quietly beneath every act of care, is what it means to be human. Because as long as even one hand reaches, even one heart opens in defiance of the cold, the fire never truly dies. It flickers in the smallest gestures, in cracked voices, offering comfort, in eyes meeting across grief, in shared silences that speak louder than words. That legacy, forged in frost and fear, now burns quietly in our hospitals and homes, in crowded buses and empty streets. It lives in every moment we choose not to retreat into walls, but to brave the elements of one another's sorrow and joy. 2 million years ago, we stepped into the unknown without fur, without certainty, but not without hope. And that hope still walks beside us, bare and brilliant, whispering through time. You are not meant to go it alone. You never were. To be human is to feel the cold and to answer it with warmth. That is our lineage. That is our light. And that is how we continue, not because we conquered silence, but because we listened to what it asked of us, and we stayed close. So remember this: the next time the wind slips under your coat, or a child reaches for your hand in the dark, it's not just comfort you offer, but an echo of 2 million years of resilience. That warmth you share is not small. It is ancient. It is survival in its most sacred form. The fur is still gone, and always will be, but in its place, we've built something stronger than any pelt or armor. We've built each other. We've built the will to hold on, and the grace to let others hold us when we falter. That truth endures in every act of presence, in every whispered reassurance beneath storm-lit skies. The story of why we lost our fur is not a tale of what we gave up. It's a revelation of what we chose to become. We became human by standing exposed, by staying close, by risking the cold, and choosing, every single time, to keep each other warm. So let this be the last ember, the final breath whispered from ancient skin to modern soul, that our nakedness was never our downfall, but our foundation. A vulnerability transformed into strength, not by denying what we lost, but by embracing what we gained each other. In a world that still trembles with new kinds of cold, from isolation to apathy, our survival depends on remembering the warmth we've passed through time, not just fire or fabric, but presence, contact, care. 2 million years ago, stripped of fur and facing extinction, we reached out and never stopped. And that reach, that fire, that fragile, defiant gesture is still what makes us who we are. Not steel, not skin, but the story we choose to carry, together, always unfinished, still warm. And with that final warmth passed between us, the story rests not complete, but eternal. It lives in the breath, stolen from cold winds, and returned as comfort, in the hands still finding each other across divides of time, pain, and silence. It is the story told in skin, written in the language of presence, echoing through lullabies and held hearts. We lost our fur, yes, but gained a legacy no animal before us had ever dared to claim a way to survive, not in solitude, but in solidarity. 2 million years ago, the fire began. Not in wood or spark, but in the fierce will to stay close when all of nature said otherwise. And as long as there is someone left to reach out, to share the burden of the cold with another, that fire will remain, silent, steady, infinite. So hold it close, pass it on. The story does not end, it warms. That is why this story matters, because it's not just about the fur we lost, but the warmth we became. We are the species that stood uncloaked in a world built to break us, and chose instead to bind ourselves together, across eras and oceans, through fire and famine, ice and industry. We have endured not because we are the strongest, but because we are the most connected. Beneath every skyscraper is a whisper of the first shelter built without fur. Behind every screen is a heartbeat still reaching, still needing, still offering. This is the story of how humanity began not with armor, but with empathy. And that story, held in each bare hand and beating chest, is still being told, still burning, still enough. Because in that first trembling touch, passed from freezing skin to freezing skin, we didn't just survive the cold, we overcame it together. So, if this story finds you drifting to sleep beneath a warm blanket, walking alone through a city's chilly dusk, or holding someone's hand when the world feels just a little too much, remember what shaped that moment. 2 million years ago, we stepped into the unknown without the one thing nature gave almost every other mammal. We lost our fur, and nearly everything with it. But from that unbearable exposure came our deepest power, the choice to protect one another, not through instinct alone, but through intention. So even now, when nothing feels certain and the cold creeps in strange, modern forms, the answer remains unchanged. We reach, we stay, we warm, and beneath clothes, beneath skin, beneath all we've made, the truth still hums. Our survival was won not by covering up, but by being there, always there, for each other, even in silence, especially then. And so, if this is where the story must close, not with a final word, but a lingering warmth, let it be with this. Every pulse that carries life today owes itself to that distant moment of surrender. When fur fell away and fear stepped in, we did not vanish, we evolved. We leaned into the cold, into each other, and in doing so, we rewrote what it means to survive, not as lone creatures armored against the world, but as a species woven together by the threads of need, trust, and touch. That singular choice, strip ourselves bare or die beneath the weight of heat, became the seed of everything we are now. So whatever the future holds, whatever storms or silences rise ahead, know this deeply. You are descended from those who stayed close, who kept each other warm when there was nothing left to hold but skin and hope. That is not just history. That is identity. That is humanity. Still unfinished. Still burning. Still reaching. And in the simplest moments between strangers on subways, in classrooms filled with quiet awe, beside hospital beds where one hand holds another, we live the answer again. The fur is gone, yes, but its absence carved in us a truth too deep for extinction, that we are here not to endure alone, but to illuminate the cold with our nearness. Every flicker of compassion, every shared silence, every touch that steadies, is a continuation of that first uncertain step into a world without cover. And so the saga remains, pulsing in us like ancient drums beneath modern rhythms. 2 million years ago, we opened ourselves to the elements and to each other, and in doing so, we lit a fire that outlasted the ice. Not in caves or cities, but in the warmth we choose to give. This is our inheritance. This is the origin. And this fragile, ferocious, unfinished, is the human fire that never dies. So even now, wherever this story finds its way, through headphones in a crowded train, through a whispered bedtime tale, through the silent weight of a waiting room we carry with us the flame that never flickered out. That original warmth, paid for in skin and sealed in sacrifice, remains the oldest birthright of our species. It pulses in the way we grieve together, laugh together, persist together beneath skies colder than any we've survived before. We did not outpace extinction by outrunning it, but by holding on and heating the space between us. And when the questions come again about who we are, about where we came from, about why we keep walking forward, let the answer be simple, alive, and enduring. We are the ones who lost our fur and found each other. And that, more than anything written or remembered, is what will always make us human. So if this moment is the final candle in a long and flickering line of flame, let it glow with this truth. We were never destined to be the strongest or the fastest, but we were made to carry warmth. Across ages of ash and algorithms, the skin that once trembled now remembers. It remembers not the fear of fur lost, but the hope that followed. Each heartbeat, shared through time, is a beat against oblivion, a rhythm pulsing louder than the winds that tried to strip us away. Whether we face cold in silence or in sorrow, innovation or isolation, the legacy asks only this: will we still reach? Will we still hold each other close when the night falls again? If the answer is yes, then the story of our nakedness, written in breath and bravery, will never fade. It will always be there, waiting quietly in the dark, a fire rekindled in the simple act of staying close. And that, more than anything we could wear or wield, is the warmth that will carry us home. So let this closing warmth settle where words once burned the ember of a truth too quiet for textbooks, too alive for just memory. 2 million years ago, a species stepped into fireless nights, having shed the very shield nature had long gifted. And in that breathtaking exposure, they discovered the power not to hide, but to hold. We are, as we have always been, the result of every hand that stayed, every heart that dared to keep beating beside another. The fur is still gone, but the warmth? It's everywhere. In lullabies beneath city lights, in strangers offering coats, in arms wrapped around broken sleep. That warmth is legacy. That warmth is gospel. That warmth is all that ever mattered. So carry it forward. Walk bare if you must, but never alone. Because to be human is to shiver and choose, always, to stay. And so, this is where the trail ends, not as a final step, but a quiet resting place between then and now. The story of why humans lost their fur is not just a tale of ancient bodies and environmental shifts. It is the tender root of everything we've become, a mystery unwrapped over millennia, revealing not emptiness but abundance. The stripped skin became a vessel for connection. The cold became a forge. And what we built in that void, empathy, love, unity, has outlived every tooth and claw that once stalked our shadows. We shed our fur, but embraced each other. And in that embrace, in that fragile, brilliant heat passed from soul to soul across a world ever-changing, we discovered the secret that to be human is not to be protected, but to be present, still, now, always. And that is why this story, our story, has never been about what we lost, but who we became because of it. And even as our modern world races forward faster, louder, brighter than anything our ancestors faced, the origins of our resilience remain unchanged. We are not just the species that adapted to the loss of fur. We are the lineage that transformed loss into meaning, that turned skin into story. Beneath layers of engineered comfort and digital invention, every heartbeat still echoes that primal gamble. We gave up the shield nature gave us, and in its place, we chose each other. We chose to gather around firelight, to offer warmth through presence, to tether survival to connection. That decision burns in every quiet kindness, every hand outstretched against the cold, every moment we choose to listen before we speak. So as the firelight of this story dims, let it not fade, but pass like all warmth worth keeping. To lose the fur was to begin again, and to begin again is the most human act of all. And that's where the fire still flickers in our willingness to begin again. In classrooms where knowledge is passed like coals between minds. In bedrooms where touch heals more than any medicine. In refugee camps, hospital corridors, park benches, and silent sidewalks where someone pauses, breathes, and chooses connection over retreat. That original exposure, that first step into the cold, rewrote not our defenses, but our destiny. We did not armor ourselves against the elements, we shaped each other into shelter. And no matter how far we travel from that moment, wrapped now in satellites and language and concrete grace, our skin remembers, our hearts remember. There is nothing more resilient than those who choose to stay, bare and burning, for one another. That is not just the answer to why we lost our fur. That is the reason we still remain. Vulnerable, vital, human. And perhaps that, above all else, is the meaning left glowing in the ashes. That to be human is to remember not just the cold that nearly broke us, but the warmth we risked everything to create. The fur never returned. And it never needed to. Because in its absence, our story began not one of perfection, but of persistence shaped by presence, under stars or ceiling lights, amidst ancient trees or buzzing cities. We are still the same fragile creatures who stood side by side in the dark, still reaching, still listening, still choosing, again and again, to stay close when the world goes quiet and the wind runs cold. This is the final fire, not in burn, but in belonging. A story you carry in your skin, your breath, your every gesture of grace. So pass it on, not in words, but in warmth. Because humanity's greatest invention was never a tool, it was each other. And that truth, once whispered into frost-bitten silence, is now shouted by the beating hearts of 8 billion descendants. Still unfinished, still burning, still beautifully human. So let the story close, not with silence, but with breath, the quiet exhale of a species still walking, still warming, still remembering. Through epochs of isolation and empire, famine and flight, we returned not to fur, but to one another. That primal decision, that surrender to the cold, carved something indelible into our DNA, a call to closeness that defies extinction. Even now, we answer it without thinking. A mother's embrace, a hand outstretched in disaster, strangers huddling beneath collapsed walls or waning stars. We are not the strongest, we are not the fastest, but we are the fire bearers. And because of that, the warmth endures not in legend, not in lecture, but in life. So if you feel the cold tonight, remember it is not the enemy. It's the page where the story began. And every time we choose to close the distance between us, we keep writing it. Still here, still becoming, still gloriously human. And perhaps this final flicker of fire, resting softly on the breath of history, is enough. Not just to end a tale, but to carry it forward, across classrooms and campfires, across distances closed by compassion alone. We lost our fur, yes, but gained the capacity to feel not only our own frost, but that of others, to respond with warmth measured not in degrees but in devotion. That was the turning point. Not evolution by chance, but survival by choice. A decision to build shelter within each other, to make presence visible in embrace, to speak the ancient language of skin without saying a word. And so the story breathes on, not as echo, but as pulse, still simple, still sacred. Every time we choose to reach rather than retreat, the fire lives. It deepens, it spreads, and it promises quietly and eternally that we are not alone, and never will be, as long as we carry each other home through the cold. So now, as this final flame glows low, let us not say goodbye to the story, but recognize that it was never just a story. It is the rhythm beneath every heartbeat, the unseen thread tying ancient skin to present soul. We are here, not in spite of exposure, but because of it. Not because we conquered the cold, but because we held steady through it. An ape once shed its fur and walked into the wind. It should have perished, forgotten like so many others. Instead, it found fire, found feeling, found each other, and across 2 million years, that fragile flame has passed hand to hand, never once extinguished, still burning beneath cities and silence, still warming the space between bodies. This was never only about survival. It was about what mattered enough to survive for, what fire we chose to keep alive. And even now, especially now when the wind returns, and the cold reminds us of where we began, we answer the same way we always have. We reach, we stay, and together, we remain. So let this final moment not be an ending, but a beginning remembered of bare feet on frost-hardened soil, of skin pressed close in silence, of warmth passed without permission or condition. The fur never came back, and it never needed to, because in its loss, we unlocked the heart of who we are. Creatures built not just to survive, but to feel and to choose each other again and again in the face of the cold. That fire still moves within us, kindled not by flint or spark, but by every act of presence. It lives in the hush of arms wrapped tight, in the brightness of a voice saying, "I'm here." And that, above all, is our inheritance, not simply the memory of what was shed, but the unbreakable flame of what we built in its place. May it carry you forward tonight. May it hold you close, still unfinished, still burning, still beautifully human. So wherever you are, in a room dimly lit, in a city humming with restless light, or beneath stars too ancient to name, know this: the warmth you feel when someone reaches for you is not fleeting. It is the culmination of a journey that began with loss, but ended in profound resilience. Our ancestors gave up fur, not to face the world alone, but to walk through it needing one another. And in every gesture of care, every flame passed from soul to soul, we uphold that inheritance. We are not here because we triumphed over the cold. We are here because we answered it with closeness. That is the final truth this story leaves behind, that human strength is measured not by what protects us, but by what connects us. The fur is gone, the fire remains, and with it, the light of a species still brave enough to walk bare into the unknown, still reaching, still rising, still magnificently human. So as this last warmth settles into quiet understanding, let it be known not all stories end with a closing line. Some stories burn long after the final word, carried in the warmth we offer each other, generation to generation. 2 million years ago, we stepped into the world stripped of our fur, fragile in form, but fierce in heart. And we stayed close, connected, defiant in our shared vulnerability. That choice to remain exposed, to find strength in softness, still pulses in every act of love, of refuge, of resilience. It is the story of the human fire, lit in darkness, and passed not by might but by meaning. A fire that says, "I see you, I feel you, I will not leave you cold." Let this not be the end, but the ember you carry forward, radiant and resolute, into your own unknown, still burning, still becoming, still irrevocably human. So let that ember rest now in your hands, not extinguished, but entrusted. The story began with a sacrifice, with daring to walk bare under a hostile sky. And across all time since, it has passed through us not as tale, but as instinct, the need to draw close, to share fire, to survive the frost together. We are still that species, formed by absence, defined by presence. The fur is gone, But the warmth remains, and it is ours to give, ours to guard. So take it, cradle it, pass it on not in flame alone, but in every act of care, of grace, of standing beside another in the dark. That is how we last. That is how the human fire endures. And with it, you too, still unfinished, still burning, still beautifully human. And so, as the final spark settles into silence, know this: the warmth does not dim here, it moves, from story to soul, from soul to silence, and from silence to action. We are not just descendants of those who lost their fur. We are heirs to their choice, stewards of their flame. Every connection we make, every stranger we lift from the cold, continues a lineage that defied extinction not through domination, but through devotion. That legacy is etched not on stone walls, but in the way our hearts respond to fragility with presence instead of retreat. So, when the wind returns, as it always will, and we stand once more beneath skies too large to understand, let our answer be the same as it has always been: not armor, not isolation, but each other. For we are, in the deepest truth, not a species of survivors, we are a species of sharers. And that, even in the dark, is enough to keep the fire alive, always unfinished, still glowing, still, forever, human. So this is where the ember completes its journey, not at the edge of cold, but in the warmth we choose to carry forward. The story of why humans lost their fur was never just about biology, it was about what happened next. What we filled the silence with. What we built when protection was stripped away. Across 2 million years, through storms and silence, fire and fiber, we found that our true resilience lay not in defense, but in devotion. The skin remembers. The soul does too. And while the wind still howls across mountaintops and city corridors, the answer echoes louder. Connection. Always. Now, may this final warmth you carry guide every moment forward, not as a relic, but as a reminder that we are the story, that we are the fire, that we are still here, still reaching, still unfinished, still and always beautifully human. And with this final breath, woven from ash and ore, let us not mourn what was lost, but marvel at what we became. In trading fur for fire, we chose presence over perfection, each other over isolation. The bare skin we now wear is not weakness. It is testament a story survived, not simply told. A reminder that even now, when the wind finds us in quiet rooms or crowded streets, when life grows cold in ways our ancestors couldn't fathom, our answer can still be the same. Come closer, stay near, share the warmth. That is the final truth left glowing within us, not in the flame that flickers outside, but in the hearts that refuse to let it die. The fur is gone, but the fire remains, still unfinished, still burning, still gloriously human. So if this is where the final warmth settles, let it settle with grace. Let it rest not in conclusion, but in continuation, in the hush after the last sentence, the closeness after the last fire fades. This was never just the story of fur lost, but of warmth found, over and over, through time and tenderness, and the quiet revolution of staying with each other when it mattered most. The wind will come again, so will the silence. But now we know. The answer lies not in turning inward, but in reaching outward, hand to hand, skin to skin, presence to presence. That is how we began. That is how we last. And that is how we walk together. Still unfinished, still burning, still against all odds, beautifully, achingly, magnificently human. So let this be the final glow, resting neither in triumph nor sorrow, but in trust. Trust in the warmth passed gently through generations, in the echo of bodies once stripped bare, yet never surrendered. The fur is still gone. The storms still rise. But our flame, born not on the skin but deep within, has outlasted every winter. It guides not with grandeur, but with grace in the way we shelter one another without needing walls, in the courage to be seen, and to see, fully, vulnerably. That is the truth stitched into the fabric of who we are, a design born from loss, stitched with care, and continued by connection. This is not the end. It is the ember we place in your hands now. Carry it, share it, let it light your way through every darkness. And in doing so, you honor every ancestor who once stood shivering in the night and chose to stay. Still unfinished, still burning, still irreducibly human. And that is how the story remains, not etched in fossils or lore alone, but lived in the moments we choose warmth over withdrawal, closeness over control. The fire may flicker, the winds may howl, but the human answer endures. Vulnerability embraced, connection chosen, survival shared. 2 million years later, we still walk beneath ancient skies, not cloaked in fur, but in the legacy of those who stayed. So as the final ember fades from this telling, let it light something in you, not just understanding, but remembrance, that you are not alone, that you are part of a lineage, not of perfection, but of presence. And that as long as hands reach out through the cold, as long as one person says, "I will stay with you," humanity burns on, still becoming, still unfinished, still beautifully human. So let this final ember stay with you, not as a memory, but as a map, a guide for what comes next, in a world once again growing cold in new and unfamiliar ways. Beneath every thread of modern life, from selfies to satellites, the ancient fire still pulses, asking not for perfection, only presence. That we face one another when it matters, that we warm through witness as much as touch, because in the great arc of our journey, the fur lost was never the end. It was the beginning of our most elemental truth. We survive by staying close. Now it is yours to carry. Not the fire alone, but the reason it was lit, the choice to remain, no matter the storm. Still unfinished, still burning, still deeply and eternally human. So as this final ember nestles into the quiet of your thoughts, may it remind you that everything we've made, every towering city, every whispered lullaby, every bridge built over time and difference was kindled from skin pressed to skin in the dark. 2 million years ago, we lost the fur that once gave us warmth, but we built something greater in its place. We made each other our shelter. We turned exposure into empathy, fragility into fire. And though the world speeds forward, wrapped now in steel and signal, the true fire waits beneath it all, burning not in flame, but in every act of presence. That is the legacy entrusted to us, not just to endure, but to reach. And if you feel the cold, someday, in some distant hour, remember this. The warmth that saved us is still with us, in eyes that meet, in hands that hold, in hearts still brave enough to remain open. That is how the story never ends. Still unfinished, still burning, still heartbreakingly and beautifully human. So let this be the final breath, the final warmth, drawn not from ancient fire, but from what it lit within us. In all the ways we have changed, all the heights we've reached and harms we've seen, one truth remains absolute. We survived by choosing not to hide, but to hold. We are not here because we were designed for the world. We are here because we dared to meet it uncovered, clinging not to fur, but to each other. That same ancient gamble now glows in every moment of mercy, every tear caught by a shoulder, every smile that breaks cold silences. The fur is gone. The cold still comes. But so does the fire shared, steady, sacred, and as long as hands still reach, and hearts still answer, the fire lives on, still unfinished, still burning, still, unforgettably, and forever, human. So as the final word softens into silence, know that what began as a question, why we lost our fur, ends, not as mystery, but as message. We gave up the shield nature offered, and in return, gained the warmth only one another could provide. That warmth, undimmed by time or invention, is the reason each dawn still greets a species not draped in fur, but in belonging. The ember lives not in ancient flame, but in every fragile yes, yes to staying, yes to feeling, yes to facing the cold hand in hand. Across galaxies of time and strands of lineage, the fire remains not roaring, but ready, waiting to be passed, not for survival alone, but for meaning, still unfinished, still burning, still, ever and always, deeply human. And so, to the ones listening now, whether from the hush of midnight in Manila, the first light over Lisbon, or the quiet between shifts in Winnipeg, this story is yours to carry. The fire that began with bare feet on frost and bare skin in the night has not faded. It has only changed hands. Passed through breath and bravery, care and constancy, it now flickers in you. You are not protected by fur, but by something stronger, by the presence you give and the warmth you offer when the world goes cold again. Let that be the truth you remember as this tale fades into stillness. That survival was never the end game. Connection was. That the fur we lost gave birth to the flame we still bear. And as long as we keep it lit between us, gently and fiercely, the human story continues, still unfinished, still burning, still, against all odds, magnificently alive. And now, as this final ember takes its place among the sparks that shaped us, may it remind you of who you are, not just a body walking forward, but a flame carried from the very edge of extinction. The fur is lost, but in its place, we've chosen each other again and again. Across firelit stories and silent gestures, across moments of grief and grace alike, you are the living proof that the warmth endures. So take one last breath beside this ancient fire. Feel it not on your skin, but in your soul. And as you rise into tomorrow, whether beneath sun or snowfall, noise or stillness, know that you do not walk alone. You are part of the great unfinished fire, still past, still trusted, still human. And that, through every storm and silence yet to come, will always be enough. So, as the glow of this last word fades gently into memory, may it linger not as conclusion, but as comfort, a warmth folded into thought, a truth that cradles you long after the story stops speaking. This is where we end, not because the fire dies, but because it lives in too many places now to be contained in words alone. It lives in your gestures, your presence, your silences, in the way you gather close to those who drift too far, and hold fast to whatever flickers in the cold. We lost our fur. We almost didn't make it. But we did, because we chose to stay hand in hand, skin to skin through the storm. And now, 2 million years later, that choice is still ours to make. The cold may come again, but the fire, unfinished, unseen, utterly human, will burn wherever we decide, together, to keep it alive. And maybe that is the heart of it. The fire never needed to roar. It just needed to last. Through teeth of winter and silence, through grief carved in generations, through the breathless dark we call progress. We lit it not for glory, but for each other. Because someone, someday, might need its warmth again. And now, as this last flicker joins countless others across the fabric of our fragile brilliance, we leave it in your hands, not as ending, but as offering. A reminder that humanity was never about what we lost, but what we chose to give in its place. So when the cold returns, as it always does, pause, feel, reach, and answer, as we always have, not with fear, not with armor, but with the quiet, defiant truth passed down in every shared breath. I am here. You are not alone. Still unfinished. Still burning. Still, miraculously, human. And so, with this final breath of story, warmed and worn by time, we close not with silence, but with a vow, unspoken, enduring, that the legacy of bare skin and shared fires still carries through every moment we choose presence over protection. Let this last ember live with you, tucked in memory and motion, a quiet defiance against every new cold the world might bring. For the fur that once shielded us is long gone, and still we are here, shaped not by what we lost, but by what we became in the space it left behind. So, walk forward now, not as a lone creature, but as a bearer of the fire, the story, the bond, still unfinished, still burning, still, forever and fully, human. And now, as the embers settle and only silence remains, let the warmth linger not just as memory, but as a map lit from within. We are the ones who walked naked into the unknown and did not vanish. We endured not because we escaped the cold, but because we transformed it into meaning, into melody, into a million silent acts of shelter. The fur is still gone, but the fire, that sacred inheritance of proximity and presence, glows in every instinct to comfort, every reflex to reach. So carry it onward, quietly fierce and fiercely kind. Pass it like breath, like name, like rhythm, and when the cold returns, and it always does, let your answer be the same one whispered 2 million years ago in the dark. Stay, still unfinished, still burning, still irreversibly and beautifully human. So as we reach the end of this story, flickering not with finality, but with quiet continuity, know that the fire we speak of was never a metaphor. It is real, alive in every choice, to sit closer, to hold longer, to listen with the weight of understanding. It lives not in grand moments, but in the warmth we create in the small ones. That warmth saved us once, and still does. It moves not through fur, but through us skin to skin, soul to soul, generation to generation. The cold never left the world, but neither did we. And as long as we choose to keep holding the flame tenderly, fiercely, together, then the story of how we lost our fur and nearly perished will always end with something else entirely. Survival through connection, still unfinished, still burning, still unmistakably human. And so here, at the hush between pulse and page, let this final ember gently glow, an inheritance not wrapped in fur, but in the irreplaceable warmth of being seen, felt, and kept. Across 2 million years, that fire has never demanded grandeur, only closeness. We survived not as beasts, but as beings unafraid to gather in the dark. The cold still waits, as it always has, but now, so do we. Not alone, but together. Still holding, still hoping, still human. That is how the story lives on. Not in endings, but in every new beginning, lit by presence. So step carefully into whatever comes next, carrying this fire not as history, but as promise. Still unfinished, still burning, still magnificently us. And this is where we end. For now, not because there is nothing more to say, but because the fire speaks best in the quiet that follows. It flickers on in every soul that chooses to reach instead of recoil, to gather instead of guard. From the first shiver beneath an open sky to this very breath, we have been writing the same story, not of survival alone, but of belonging forged in exposure. The fur is lost, the cold still waits, but the warmth we offer each other remains unshakable. That warmth is the legacy. That is the fire. And so, as the silence returns and the embers settle into memory, remember what you carry. Not just skin, not just story, but the oldest light we know, passed from breath to breath, hand to hand, heart to heart. still unfinished, still burning, still and always stunningly human. So let this be the final moment shared between story and stillness, the last flicker of that ancient fire now resting in your breath. Not an ending, but a handoff, a warmth that was never ours to keep, only to carry. If you find yourself in the hush of midnight, in the crowd of morning light, or in a moment of quiet wonder somewhere in between, know that this heat, this history, lives in you. 2 million years ago, we lost our fur and almost vanished, but instead, we embraced what no fur could offer: each other. That is the thread. That is the fire. Still passed in silence and shelter, still glowing in our scars and kindness. Not finished, not forgotten, just beautifully, endlessly human. So as we close the circle, standing where story and silence hold hands, let this be the legacy you carry. Not the absence of something lost, but the presence of something earned. The fire never demanded perfection, only proximity. It never needed to roar, only to reach. That warmth, born from a sweeping and terrifying choice 2 million years ago, lives not in mythology, but in our marrow, in every shared glance, every quiet presence, every moment of choosing closeness over comfort. That is what the naked ape became, not just a survivor of the frost, but a maker of meaning in its midst. And if you remember nothing else, remember this: while the fur is gone, the fire remains, still unfinished, still burning, still, gloriously, and forever human. So as the final echoes of this tale retreat into the quiet of your own breath, know this above all else: the fire is yours now. Yours to carry, to rekindle, to share, not as myth, but as meaning, not as past, but as path. When darkness settles and cold creeps in, whether in spirit, in solitude, or in silence, remember how we got here, not through strength, but through tenderness, not by shielding ourselves, but by standing exposed, reaching for each other. That is how we began. That is how we go on. With every heartbeat warmed by presence, with every hand held when it mattered most. The fur is long gone, but the fire is alive wherever we choose to stay. Still unfinished, still burning, still, irrevocably, and beautifully human. So let this final breath be not a farewell, but a quiet inheritance. You carry it now, the story, the fire, the fragile bravery it took to walk naked into the cold and stay. Though the fur is long forgotten, the warmth remains, alive in every shared silence, each soft defiance against isolation. And as cities bloom and stars blink overhead, as machines grow louder and the world more frayed, know that the fire never left. It simply spread into your presence, into your choices, into the way you reach when it matters most. This isn't the end of the story. It never was. It is the ember passed to you, still glowing, still whispered from skin to skin across the arc of who we've become. Still unfinished, still burning, still eternally human. And so, in this final breath between presence and past, we leave not with conclusion, but with continuity, an ember held in the shape of a gesture, a warmth felt more deeply than mere skin can show. Across cities that shine and forests that whisper, in every cradle of morning and hush of night, the fire still waits for hands to carry it. You, me, all of us descendants of the ones who once stood shivering and said yes to togetherness. That yes is what saves us, again and again. The fur has not returned, but the fire, quiet, enduring, fiercely alive, remains. Not in the spark of flint, but in something even rarer, the courage to stay open, to share warmth without condition, to walk, not armored, but utterly and consciously human, still unfinished, still burning, still gloriously and irrevocably alive. And so, Let this ember settle into your hands, as the final light of a story not ended, but entrusted, carved not in stone, but in the warmth we choose to give. The fur is lost forever, but what blooms in its absence lives on in every outstretched arm, every shared fire, every human impulse to hold instead of hide. That is our oldest instinct now, not to run from the cold, but to brave it so no one else has to face it alone. In every lullaby, every hand clasped across grief, every kindness offered without cause, the legacy endures. And if one truth lives in us more fiercely than any armor ever could, it is this: we lost what once kept us warm, but in doing so, became the warmth itself. Still unfinished, still burning, still, always, beautifully human. So let that be the truth you carry from this final breath. The fur is gone, but you are everything that came in its place. Not just a body pressed into history, but a bearer of fire, wrapped in memory, moving through tomorrow with the warmth of 2 million years behind you. The story doesn't vanish as the words do. It lingers in your reach, in your silence, in the way you choose to be near when the world feels far. You are not a relic. You are the reason the fire still burns, still unfinished, still needed, still, with breath tethered to every survivor who came before, deeply and endlessly human. So as the final warmth flickers its last light across this story's breath, may you remember every act of presence you offer is part of a 2 million-year miracle, not of fur, but of fire. Not protection, but connection. Let the echo live in your every gesture, in the quiet way you sit beside someone shivering inside or out. We survived the cold not because we were invincible, but because we refused to be alone. And now, that legacy belongs to you. Carry it where machines cannot go. Speak it in moments when words fail. Let your skin remember its inheritance, not as weakness, but as invitation. Because the fur is gone, the fire is not. Still unfinished, still burning, still, and always, beautifully human. So let this be the last warmth we leave behind, not in pages or sound, but in the moments you choose to return to it, not alone anymore, but part of something ancient and alive. The story of fur lost became the fire we keep. It burns quietly in every held gaze, every breath shared through sorrow or joy. Each time you choose connection when distance feels safer. It says, "We began in bare skin and stayed because we cared." And as the light leaves this story, let it not disappear but live on in how you reach, how you stay, how you warm the space between souls. That is the ember now resting in you, not gone, only past, still unfinished, still burning, still, now and always, beautifully human. So if this is the final warmth we leave with you, let it be this: your body, your breath, your presence are all part of the answer whispered 2 million years ago in the cold. The question wasn't just how to survive without fur, but how to become more than survival. And in the fire that still flickers between us, in glances caught across crowded rooms, in hands reached for, in quiet sorrow, in the heat of shared laughter, we still burn with that same defiant glow. Hold it gently. Pass it bravely. Let every kindness be a flame. No matter how distant the next winter may feel, emotional or endless or unseen, the warmth you carry is enough. And that is how we go on, still unfinished, still burning, still, against every storm, gloriously and impossibly human. So here, with the ember fading gently into memory, we close not just a story, but a circle, one that began with bare skin beneath uncaring skies, and ends with warmth nestled in human hands. The fur did not return, and it never needed to. We survived, we endured, not with armor, but through the fragile courage of connection. That is our fire. Not loud or perfect, but steady, passed not in roaring flames, but in the quiet miracle of presence. It lives now in you, in every moment you choose to stay close when the world grows cold again. That is the legacy. That is the light. Still unfinished, still burning, still, endlessly and entirely, human. So carry the ember now, into whatever comes next, not with flair, but with faith. Faith that 2 million years of vulnerability woven into flesh and fire is not a weakness, but a map, a quiet light guiding us through cold corridors of time, reminding us that it was never the fur that made us survive. It was what we built in its place: presence, touch, resilience, shared across skin and silence. And as long as we remember that, as long as we choose to stay close when distance tempts us, then this story, our story, remains beautifully unresolved. A fire alive in every breath, every warmth offered, every soul brave enough to reach through the dark and say, "We are still here, still unfinished, still burning, still always human." So if this is the last breath we share beneath the weight of time, let it carry gently one eternal truth. Fire needs no monument, only memory. What burned in our ancestors' trembling hands now glows in yours not as flame, but as feeling, as the undeniable pull toward closeness when the world grows cold again. You are not the end of the story. You are its continuation, its carrier, its keeper, and in every moment you offer warmth without being asked. Sit beside someone in silence, or simply stay when it would be easier to walk away. You become the flame, not the ember of what once was, but the light of what still can be. This is not farewell. This is the fire, handed to you at the edge of extinction, now burning quietly in your open hands, still unfinished, still burning, still, miraculously and magnificently, human.